All right, welcome to Halitics on Thursday, and I'm really excited to talk to Alice Wilkerson. Alice is the executive director of Advance Maryland. We're all about change here. We're all about trying to make things a little bit better, especially for poor, struggling, and working people. So your focus is identical, Alice. I put the mission and vision up. I don't know if you want to kind of flesh that out a little bit, and then we'll get into the actual logistics of how Advanced Maryland makes change, and then whether we're seeing the change we need, and can we see the change we need. All right, that's enough of an introduction. Go, Alice.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, so our mission, our vision really centers around strengthening advocacy campaigns, especially progressive advocacy campaigns in Maryland, in Annapolis, at the state level. And we really try to use our skills, political connections, policy knowledge to strengthen those campaigns and make advocacy efforts more effective.
All right, you're watching Halitics, by the way. It is Thursday, the 16th, I think, something like that. I don't even know. But you might be watching on a different day and a different time, so I don't do the mornings anymore like I used to when I did radio. Alice Wilkerson with us. Don't forget, subscribe if you haven't yet subscribed to Halitics, and click like. I need those subscriptions so I can keep doing this. And once we get to 1,000, I'm going to be super excited and I'll cheer and holler. So Alice, this is really interesting. You're sort of like a fund of funds almost. Is that right? You're a resource for progressive organizations across the state.
We are a nonprofit for other nonprofits. So we do not have a strict membership base. We're not the Sierra Club that operates off of a membership base and then we go and do advocacy on behalf of our members. We are also not a service provider. We're not providing direct services that, help people in the communities. But we are a nonprofit. So we are funded with nonprofit dollars, both 501c3 and C4 dollars. And we really try to serve other advocates and other nonprofits. And that means that we show up in a lot of different ways in different spaces. Our focus is what is the need and addressing that need and filling the gaps. We don't want to be duplicative. If something's going well, if people are like doing a great job, fantastic. We're happy to sign on and support that. But we're going to spend our time and our money helping issues that are under-resourced, helping coalitions that really need infrastructure and support so that the policy experts, people with lived experience, can be the ones who are speaking and be the face of those campaigns, and we can handle the logistics. And messaging support. A big part of what we do is provide messaging support and helping to make sure that organizations are talking to each other, that we have cohesive, solid messaging, and everyone is communicating with each other so that we can all be effective.
Is this a new model? I'm not really familiar with this. Now, I have worked in many progressive groups. I recently left Our Revolution, the national organization, as a national coordinator, but I'm still very involved in Our Revolution Maryland. And frankly, I am not aware of this particular model.
Yes, it's definitely a new model. We are a part of a national network of affiliates. We're part of the Progress Now network. And the Progress Now network really focuses on having progressive communications hubs, but each affiliate runs their organization in a different way and has different priorities because they're actually a national organization that recognizes each state is different. And we need to have state organizations that can pivot to do what is most needed and what will help us be the most effective in each state. So we have part of our national model of the campaign hub or the communications hub, and then we combine that with our on the ground knowledge. And just this was my 16th session. I've been in Annapolis a really long time. I worked for Jamie Raskin for 10 years when he was in the state Senate. I have been on the inside of things. I have served as a lobbyist for nonprofits, doing contract work directly with nonprofits. And now I'm in a nonprofit role. So I've had a lot of different experiences, and I'm able to bring that knowledge to this work to try and set up an organization that focuses on what a lot of times what I think that we really need to be doing to move forward, to move the like what's it going to take to really move our progressive movement in Maryland, especially right now. We've come out of 8 years of Hogan and a really challenging relationship between the General Assembly and the executive branch, where every fight was made that much harder because of the threat of vetoes and things like that. So what are we doing now to really build a strong movement? And are we like, we need to meet this moment. And so the model is very Maryland specific. And how are we going to address the needs for our state? So it should be unique. That's the idea. There's no one size fits all for all of our states. So this is what we think we should be doing, and we will see if it works out.
All right, so I put up on the screen there, the vision was fumbling a little bit, but got that. I think that's the gist of your vision here. And obviously, I mean, to some extent, I want to say it's boilerplate because there's real specifics, but it is consistent, shall we say, with a general progressive soup to nuts kind of mission or vision, certainly very similar to our revolutions. And I guess my question is, how do you feel that, well, let's start with this. Is there one overarching issue that Advanced Maryland is, puts before the others, like affordable housing? I know when I was doing more organizing, this issue came up over and over and over. It's just too expensive to live in Montgomery County, where I live, or pretty much anywhere in Maryland, except maybe very rural areas. It may be less, it doesn't require as high a percentage of the average income to live. So, and I'm just throwing that as an example. Is there an overarching issue, or is it all of them together, one ball of wax? And then how do you decide, is there a litmus test for you to determine whether you'll work with a particular organization?
Sure. Great questions. So I think the overarching issue is, are we a state with opportunity? So we use an opportunity lens. And for us, these are all really core pillars of opportunity. Often when we talk about opportunity, the conversation starts and ends with education. And people think, oh, if we do everything that we need to do to build the best education system in the world, we've done everything we need to provide people with opportunity. That is really important. And we are working really hard as a state to build up our education system. It is not enough. We can get the best education system we need. We can get the best schools in Baltimore City. It's still not going to address the problems. If people do not have safe, affordable, reliable housing, they don't have access to opportunity. If they can't access transportation to get to the jobs that we're pouring money into creating, then they still don't have access to opportunity, and we're still not solving the problems in our community. So opportunity is really what we use to govern everything else. And all of the other words those are the pillars that go into it. Do we have a livable future, right? There's no opportunity for anyone in a climate like crisis. There just isn't. There's no long-term future hope or opportunity for anyone in that scenario. So we use opportunity as that big picture lens. And then as far as a litmus test goes, it really depends on a number of factors, and how we operate, how we assist campaigns differs based on the issues in terms of how are they resourced, who is already involved, what's the strength of a coalition. Is it one organization that we're trying to help out with something, or is there a full coalition there? Because we are trying to come in and meet specific needs, we are not necessarily responsible for soup to nuts, developing the policy, finding the bill sponsor, putting all the testimony together, organizing all the people to come down. Like, we're not doing everything. We are doing very specific, we're taking a surgical approach to the issues, which allows us to do more. And again, we want to fill the needs that are there. So we have some coalitions that have amazing policy experts, national experts, local experts, lots of attorneys, people with lots of energy, but they don't know Annapolis really well. And so what they need support for is, getting the right people in the room. How does Annapolis work? What's the process like? And that kind of structural support. And then we have other folks that are a large coalition, maybe of like people with direct and lived experience and policy knowledge, and they need some like direct lobbying support. And so we can help them in that way. And then other times it's just helping organizations understand the process better so that they can advocate for themselves. So oftentimes you will not see Advance Maryland's name on things, but we're actually really heavily involved in coalitions and supporting organizations. We're not doing it for our name to get, it's not so I can get myself out there in front. It's not for Advance Maryland to get credit for something. We want to make sure that we are, making policy change and that right folks are at the table and that legislators are turning to our communities. They're turning to people who have lived experiences. They're turning to progressive policy advocates and getting the information that they need to make change happen.
All right, we're talking to Alice Wilkerson on Halitics this morning, and so glad to speak to Allison. No, it's true, you're not a real high-profile group. You're not getting your name in Maryland Matters a lot, for example, or the Sun or the Post. At least if you are, I'm not seeing it there. I do want to thank, by the way, Larry Ottinger for brokering this conversation this morning. So Larry, thank you so much for doing that. Really delightful. And again, I wanted to talk to you, Alice, because I'm always looking for models and to platform individuals and organizations that really are working for progressive change and that have a chance, or that may be, a model that we can replicate for more and more success, or just promote within our state for success to make change. I want to get to whether you've been impactful. You feel like this past session was impactful, but just let's talk about your priorities for a moment. I just took some from the Baltimore Banner, which I'm not familiar with that media group, but I assume it may be more conservative. I really don't know, but I don't think it matters because this is purely reporting on a Goucher poll. So the number one issue for Maryland is safe communities, crime being the number one issue, but others very, very close, which we'll talk about in a second. That does seem to go to opportunity, right? I mean, if people are choosing a criminal career, if we can use it the term career in that regard, they probably don't have a lot of opportunities to make, to survive and have a decent life. And it also does certainly reduce the opportunities for people who live in communities that are not safe. Is that something you're working with? I know there's always a focus on the left to make the police more responsive, and that goes to safety, right? If you're afraid of the police, you're not safe. But I think the fear right now in many communities is violent crime. Is that something that your organization is working with groups on?
Yes, and I do want to talk about that and all the things that we're doing. First, though, I do want to call out this poll because I question the question, which it is very important for us to always think about how are we structuring polls. We have done polling in the past, and I don't know how, and I've gone through to see what's publicly available. I haven't been able to answer the question yet, but how did they ask this question? Because if you ask folks, what is your number one issue? And it's open-ended, or we provide them with another opportunity to open-ended. What are your top 3 issues that you care about the most? And we do not put a list of issues in front of them. Does crime come up at this high of a level? I don't think that it does. We did a poll 2 years ago, and we asked people an open-ended question. And crime came up at 17%. That's a big difference, okay? Because if people have to stop and think, well, what is on the top of my mind? What do I care about the most in this moment? They're going to come up with a lot of things. It might be the economy. Most answers came down to an economic security answer. It came out in different ways, but we could have said well over 50% of respondents in our poll identified some type of economic security issue, whether it was related to the pandemic and sort of uncertainty about the economy post-pandemic, or they themselves had concerns about their own economic situation or just long-term it was economic first and foremost, which we do see also comes up in this poll. But we had schools and crime were lower, which is just very interesting because when people put a poll together, they're always going to put crime on their education, which I'm not saying we shouldn't ask about these issues, but we are biasing the poll from the beginning if we are giving folks a list of 5 or 10 issues and saying, think about these issues and now which one there. And then they go, oh yeah, crime. Crime is important now that you say that. I care a lot about crime. We do know everyone absolutely deserves to be safe in their communities. And like we should be focusing on public safety and accountability for our elected officials for maintaining public safety. This is something that we work on, a huge priority for us. And one of the things that we support is the Maryland Youth Justice Coalition and ending the automatic charging of kids as adults. Maryland ranks at the bottom. It is us, Alabama, and Florida for prosecuting the most kids as adults. There was a new report that just came out from Human Rights for Kids. Maryland ranks 4th for incarcerating the most kids in the country. We are number 1 for incarcerating Black children as adults. For incarcerating Black children, period. This is unacceptable. If you want to address public safety, we have to look at what we are doing. If you are unhappy right now with the status quo, if you're unhappy with crime in the state of Maryland, you have to ask, what are the policy decisions that we have been making that got us here, and what are we doing to address it? And absolutely no one wants to address it. It's a huge problem. It's a massive fight. The bill, we called it the Yes Act this year, but it's the bill to end the automatic charging of kids as adults. That has been around for 14 sessions. It has not ever come up for a vote in either committee, in either chamber. There have been 3 chairmen of the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee in that time, and the bill has never been called for a vote.
All right, we're talking to Alice Wilkerson. She is from Advance Maryland. If you want to join us, you can. 240-363-7019. You can see the number on the screen. I leave it up the whole show pretty much. So you can join us if you have any questions about the organization or what its priorities are, how it is implementing change in the state of Maryland. You know, I was thinking about what you were saying there, Alice, about charging kids as adults. I was another life, I was an attorney. My first job out of law school was clerking for a Superior Court of District of Columbia judge. And he was a conservative, he was a Republican judge. But I remember he was really outraged when the juvenile division would try to place kids in facilities for adults. That was really upsetting to him. He said it's just totally wrong, and it does create more it can, and you don't want to ever write anyone off, but it certainly makes it much more likely that that juvenile will graduate to a life of crime. So that's very consistent with what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's also illegal. Now it is illegal. We are in violation of federal law. This is also not just a state level issue, but a county issue. Let's look at our county state's attorneys and our prosecutors, because Montgomery County, Baltimore County, only a handful of our counties actually have Democrats as our state's attorneys, and they are very conservative on this, and they are some of the loudest voices in Annapolis. And it is Montgomery County voters who are electing, John McCarthy and sending him to Annapolis over and over again so he can advocate for these highly conservative policies on criminal justice.
I think the same.
Also, Senate judicial proceedings led by two Montgomery County progressives, Senator Will Smith, Senator Jeff Waldstreicher. But we still can't get this bill to come up for a vote in that committee.
Yeah, so Senator Will Smith, I think, is a military background, and there's also a former sheriff, I believe, or police chief who's in office in Maryland, Prince George's County, maybe, who is very conservative, quote, conservative on crime, whatever that means. Well, basically, law and order does not show concern for the rights of the accused, especially if they're juvenile. So it's a very serious problem, and voters are voting sometimes not for the more reform-minded candidates. We saw that in Baltimore County as well. I know we had a race there for state's attorney, and I cannot now remember the man's name who was running as the reform candidate. And we thought he had a real shot. He did lose to an incumbent who had a record of corruption. So it does seem that the average voter doesn't prioritize. I'm sorry to say, and I hate to try to poke hole, whatever in your model, but that does not seem to be the priority, unfortunately. In other words, reform that we would like to see in the criminal justice system, because it doesn't make us more safe.
I think there's also, how do we talk about it and what do we allow people to get away with? Are we really pressing, especially in Maryland? Like, the way that we are set up is the primaries are the most important. And we have a lot of Democrats, but we also have a lot of uninformed voters across the board, whatever your political persuasion is. We have a lot of uninformed voters and a lot of voters who don't understand really what the function of the state legislature is or what their state's attorney is. And so, look, I've been on a number of campaigns. I have door knocked all across the state. I have door knocked probably 50% of Montgomery County, certainly the eastern portion of the county. I've been all over it. And in primary races, knock on the door, you get a voter who says, oh, I'm a Democrat, I'm going to vote for the Democrats. Great, right. But this is still a primary, and we still need you to pay attention to what's going on. And so we do get a lot of once you're elected as a Democrat, you are in. You're in for life. We're never going to get rid of anyone. Because it's the incumbent, it's the name recognition. Oh, they've got a D behind their name, I'm good. And we have a lot of voters who just don't think beyond that. And so, that's work for us to do. We also need to be educating the public. This is why messaging is so important. And how are we talking about issues? But there's also a perception when you get into Annapolis where I think people see this state as more purple than I believe that it is. And that's something that we also have to work on.
All right. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I do want to move on because we only have so much time. Let me put it that way. You talked about the economic issues as maybe being a higher priority than crime. That certainly is borne out by this second list of issues that, yes, everyone says crime is important. If you think about it, you're going to say, yeah, I want to reduce crime. And there is no question a problem, especially, I think, in inner cities where Baltimore is a lot of property crime and violent crime. In my neighborhood, I live in a nice neighborhood, whatever you want to call it. I don't know. I don't want to, it's a relatively affluent neighborhood, but there's definitely break-ins. There's definitely property crime. Fortunately, we haven't had the violent crime issues. But what you're talking about, poverty, jobs, education, also rank very, very high. Are there popular solutions to the problem? For example, in Montgomery County, we always hear, we have great schools, we prioritize education, but getting the county council or the board of ed to really focus on what are proven solutions to, reading level deficiencies, math deficiencies, making STEM students more successful. They don't necessarily do what it seems the public wants them to do.
Yeah, these are all big challenges. Especially when we look at Montgomery County in particular, the size of the school system becomes so challenging. it becomes really hard to institute change in a county that's that size. I mean, it's really operating on a size and a scale similar to a number of states in this country. It can be easier to make those types of changes in our smaller counties than it sometimes is in the bigger counties. I'm not an education policy expert, so I'm not going to weigh in on any specific recommendations for what I think Montgomery County Board of Ed should be doing. But, you know, I know that you have a number of great advocates and even former members of the board, like Jill Ortman-Faust, like who are just fantastic. You know, how are we talking to our legislators about these issues, and how are we prioritizing them? You know, we have to keep the conversation going, and we certainly need to continue to do it at the ballot box, and then participating in the process. And at least we have people participating in the process in Montgomery County, and the county is fairly accessible in terms of being able to hear from constituents. To move back to Annapolis issues, you know, one of our big challenges is it operates for 90 days, January to early April, and it's really hard to get down to Annapolis. Hearings are held at 1:00 in the afternoon, typically on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. And if you're going to come down and testify, I hope that you got here 2 hours early so that you got parking, that you're able to pay for parking, also that you have a car that allows you to access Annapolis, also that you can take off from your job, or you don't have kids at home that you need to care for or get after school, so that you have the ability to come down to Annapolis to speak to your legislators in the first place. And then we're going to ask you to sit around for anywhere from 1 to maybe 8, 9, 10 or more hours for your 2 minutes of time to testify. That hopefully there are enough legislators still sitting in the room to hear from you when you do come to speak.
Yeah, that's a big, I just want to give a quick personal experience on that. Yes, I was down in Annapolis or out in Annapolis whatever the term is, a couple months ago to testify in support of one fair wage for all tipped workers. And we had some tip workers there, servers at restaurants and the like. And we were there for about 8 hours. It was just crazy. I mean, it just went on and on. We arrived around noon and we didn't get out till, about 7. So I say 8 because by the time we were able to leave the area. So for working people who aren't getting compensated for that time, it's often impossible.
Yes. It is. It is not accessible, and it could be accessible, and they could make it more accessible. Thankfully, because of the pandemic, we now have the option to have some virtual testimony. There was a lot of debate about whether they were going to continue to allow and create a hybrid system for people to provide virtual testimony. That has been just so significant. I'm really glad that they've maintained it. I would love to see it expanded. I would also like to get more people taking advantage of that so that they are able to voice their concerns. I know one of the things that we've also talked about is the influence of, lobbyists, corporate money in politics. And the only way we're ever going to counter that is with more constituent voices, and for legislators to hear directly, from their voters about the issues that they care about. One of the things that we do is try to both demystify, what's going on in Annapolis, how can you access the system, but also create new pathways for people to have their voice heard. So, we've created a public comment tool where we allow people to give us their 2-3 sentences, their paragraph, and we will put it together and submit it as testimony. Because otherwise, if you want to submit testimony, you have to create an account, yet another login account. You have to write up all of your testimony. You have to make sure that you submit it between these hours, these many days ahead of the hearing. And it's complicated. Even that's not easy to do. So we try to take that burden away from folks, and then also compile it so we can deliver it to legislators and say, hey, 50 people wrote in about this. Or, the Trans Health Equity Act, we had well over 200 public comments on that, in addition to the dozens of organizations and advocates who submitted their own testimony. And I think at the end, we had well over 2,000 emails that went from constituents to their legislators in support of that bill, which did pass this year after having a very difficult session the year before.
Yeah, so there was some progressive movement in the 2023 session, and we'll talk about the length of the session if there's enough time and some other issues. But I just really want to get your take. So here's Maryland Matters. I spoke to Andy Ellis a few weeks ago. People who want to see that video, just go into Halitics, at Halitics on YouTube. And I believe it was April 28th, which is the exact date of this article. So it's very fortuitous when I spoke to Andy. Andy, by the way, running perhaps for governor in 2020, whatever year it is, 2028, I guess, or 6, as a Green Party candidate. And I actually want to bring up third parties as well with you. But we talked about those first 100 days. Andy was, I guess, cautiously positive about it. He felt there was some, meaningful change. Is that your sense? And maybe you're even more optimistic. What do you think of, that first session with a Democratic governor and a veto-proof Democratic majority in both houses in Annapolis?
I'm absolutely optimistic. I also want to put a little bit more context on sort of what the assessment is. And as we think about the legislative outcomes from this session, I don't want to frame this in a way of look at everything that the Democratic-led legislature was able to do in the absence of Hogan. I want to be really clear. If we care about progressive policy in this state, you need to look at the legislature and with a more critical eye. It is not what did they do now that Hogan isn't there? It's what did they do now that we have actual leadership coming from the governor's office? Because if you look at a lot of the more progressive things that we saw this session, they were led by the governor's office. And I don't know if those would have been the legislature's priorities. If there was, a Peter Franchot in as governor who wasn't setting a progressive policy tone. We passed permanent expansion of the earned income tax credit and child tax credit for undocumented families. Would the legislature have done that on its own? I don't know if they would. Would they have accelerated the minimum wage? That was their bill. They set the they set this calendar when they originally passed the bill, and Wes Moore came in and said this is not enough and it's not soon enough. He also wanted indexing. Indexing would have been critical. We absolutely should have indexing with the minimum wage. We don't. Why? The legislature took it out. The Democratic-led legislature took that out of the bill. But Governor Moore started from a more progressive place. And he and his team were at the table. He personally came to the table and testified on a number of bills this session, something that Larry Hogan never did in 8 years. And also Larry Hogan never had his own agenda for any kind of legislation. But it's not just what was the legislature able to accomplish without Larry Hogan there. It's what did Governor Moore lead the legislature to? And we had lots of questions when he first came in about, is he going to be able to get what he wants done? We need to be asking why the legislature doesn't follow his lead. Can they meet the bar that he is setting? Because I think that he is coming in with some ambitious progressive policy. I'm not going to say I agree with every single thing that he has done or will do, but it's definitely setting a different tone.
All right. Consistent with what you said, Alice, and I just put up this slide here, the legislators did strip out a provision to index future increases, right, to the minimum wage. Now, that was a very politically inastute move, in my opinion, because now, and I don't base that just on my opinion, but from talking to people in the know, this means that every few years there's going to be another food fight over in over raising the minimum wage, whereas that wouldn't be, be off the table going forward. It would just be part of the law, and then there would be on Republicans and conservatives to try to stop that, and that would be an unpopular, political move if they tried to prevent the minimum wage from going up with inflation. So why do you think the legislature, despite being a Democratic, totally, we're it's a trifecta state. Why are they not passing what the governor wanted in this case?
So I think that the House is more closely aligned with the administration, and I don't think that we should have a system where the legislature is an automatic check on everything that the administration wants to do. So I certainly don't want to come across the wrong way with that. But I do think that especially the Senate is a more moderate body, even than what we had 10 years ago. I think a lot of the senators are they're more cautious, they're more moderate. I'm still trying to figure out why. That's part of my job. Figure out what that is. Part of it is an education thing. Part of it's an adjustment too. I mean, 8 years of Hogan. I don't think that for folks who aren't like deep in the weeds in Annapolis, it's really hard to explain the extent of damage that was done and just how difficult it has been to make policy change. Even if you were well-intended, even if you really wanted to, not having state agencies come to the table for 8 years, actually losing all of our institutional knowledge because people quit or were fired from our state agencies. One of the biggest challenges that Governor Moore is facing right now is rebuilding our agencies just to get them back to doing their job. We are facing a massive deficit in terms of the vacancies for state employees. Like, it's really difficult. It is a crisis. And so I don't want to discount that legislators do ask really important questions. We can have great, ambitious policy, but if we don't have the government infrastructure, the staff to pull it off, to implement it, to regulate it, we're not going to be able to do the job. And so the legislature does have an important role to play in that and in asking those questions. But we also do have some time to rebuild those agencies to try and meet the moment, to get those policies in place. Like, we have to have the staff to do it so that they will be successful. That said, like, I would love to see a more progressive Senate. I would love to see more progressive voices speaking up in the Senate. I feel like that body has grown quieter. And maybe that was just the transition between having Senate President Miller to Senate Wilkerson. And it's just a personality change in the leadership. But it's a different body now. And I think
Senator Miller was very conservative. He was very, deferential to the demands or calls of the more rural Democratic legislators and also Republicans. He was, always bipartisan. He was not prepared to challenge, them. And he always, as my history recommend, you were there. Generally would discount what folks like, your legislator, your first delegate, then Senator Raskin wanted. And I think money is a huge part of it. I think we just cannot ignore the power of lobbyists and campaign donations and jobs too, because it's not a full-time job. So they're looking for, work. The delegates and senators want full-time, want to get paid. And that's for 9 months basically or less, since they're spending so much time in Annapolis. And who's going to pay them that? People who want something back when they go to work in the Capitol.
So, and I agree with that. I actually think one of the things we don't talk about enough or really understand is because we have a citizen legislature, it means that they have full-time jobs. They've got something else that they're supposed to be doing at least the other 9 months of the year, and then try and figure out how they're going to do it for the 3 months that they're in session. They're also not necessarily, they have lived experience, some policy experience, but they're not knowledgeable on the full range of policies that the General Assembly looks at every session, certainly when they come in. And we have constant change. We have new members all of the time. So one of the things that we have to think about is lobbyists, whether they're corporate lobbyists, which is a majority of them, or they're public interest lobbyists. I was a lobbyist for 4 years. I worked with a firm. I had contracts, but I represented all nonprofits. I represented all progressive oriented organizations, but I was still a lobbyist. And I want to draw attention to this because the lobbyists will always be there. Who has the most institutional lobbyists or the institutional knowledge? It's the lobbyists. So I've been around more than probably 50. I've been around longer by more than at least 50% of the entire General Assembly. I've been around longer than most of our senators right now. So I know how we got here. I have a lot of the history. And so I can use that to my advantage when I'm doing my advocacy work. And lobbyists use that too. They're an instant resource. Like, I can be valuable then to new legislators because I can tell them, what happened before and how did we get here, and let me help you understand the law. And that's how we build relationships, and that's how we become effective advocates. So even though I'm coming from a nonprofit advocacy side of it, I think that my institutional knowledge and policy knowledge, that helps me to build those relationships. That is more valuable than I don't write any campaign contributions. I have a rule. I don't do campaign contributions.
But doesn't that limit your influence, right? I mean, that's the issue. You have less money. Your institutional knowledge is critically important. And yes, people will depend on it. And it gives you some gravitas. It gives you some influence. But ultimately, you're not taking the senators out for steak dinners. You're not writing their campaigns contributions. And that is going to limit how much influence you ultimately can have over many of them. Not all, and some of them, are pretty, I don't want to say everyone's, well, I do believe everyone is certainly corruptible, but some are far more easily corrupted or far more easily able to rationalize making a particular decision that may or may not be good for their constituents. I'm just making the point that when you have, special interests with large cash coffers, they are going to have an outsized role.
Yes, I don't disagree with you. I will say Maryland is one of the best states in the country for how we regulate our campaign donations. This is something that Jamie Raskin has cared about deeply and is one of the big, these were reforms that we made under Mike Miller. We made it quite some time ago. I mean, it's caps on all contributions. We have a $6,000 cap. Also, what I think is most important for Maryland, we are unique in the country in terms of how we regulate independent expenditures. We have the strictest independent expenditure law across the board. And it's like, it would be so much worse. And we changed that, I think, almost well over 10 years ago. So that is also important. And I don't want to say money in politics is not a big deal, and it's not a big deal in Annapolis. It is. I don't feel like I've ever been in a situation, though, where it was pay to play. I don't feel like the fact that I don't give contributions has ever been an issue. What do we do to counterbalance campaign contributions? We mobilize people. We bring constituents in. We bring constituent voices to the legislature, and we turn out voters. And that scorecards, legislative scorecards are really powerful. And how do we find other ways to hold our politicians accountable? That's how we counter that corporate money.
Yeah, no, that's a really, I don't want to say, over optimistic. It's optimistic. I hope you're right. I hope that we can bring about the changes we need. I do think, and people have seen from some of what I've been posting, that there were some real pluses that came out of the more first General Assembly session. I want to get to some questions for you, Alice. I really, again, greatly appreciate your time. People have seen the whole time, by the way, the website for your organization, advancedmaryland.org. Please go there for more if you want to learn more. Is there anything else in particular you'd like to urge folks to do if they want to be part of progressive change in our state, the free state here?
Talk to your elected officials, number one.
Wait, say that again. Talk to them. Is that what you said? I'm sorry.
Yes.
I just didn't catch. Okay, go ahead.
Yep. Talk to your elected officials, and that can be face-to-face conversations. It can show up at events, email them, send them direct messages on Twitter, call them out. Call them out for not being progressive and challenge them. It is not enough, especially if you're a Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Baltimore City, voter. It is not enough for your legislator to reply back and say, oh, yes, when that bill comes to the floor, I plan to vote for it. What are you doing to make sure that it gets to the floor? I understand that it's not in your committee. Are you talking to your colleagues? Are you asking them? Are you telling leadership that your constituents care about this and you need this bill to come to the floor because you are ready and want to vote for it? So I think we're giving too many thumbs up, good job, check marks, whatever, to folks who aren't actually working to get bills passed. We're giving them a pass because they're saying, that's not my committee. I like that. I agree with it. I'll vote for it when it comes to the floor. If it's coming to the floor, we already know that you're going to vote for it, right? It's the committee process that matters. And so what are you doing to talk to your colleagues that are on the committee? So if you care a lot about a particular issue and it's in a committee and your legislator is not on it, you need to ask them what they are doing to help make sure that it gets out of that committee. Not just saying, great, I'm glad you'll vote for it when it comes to the floor. That's the easiest thing that they could do. It's how do we get the bill up for a vote in committee and out of that committee? That's really important. And so, you need to push back on that. It's not enough to just say you're going to vote for it. What are you doing to make it happen?
All right. You're watching Halitics. By the way, I said earlier it's the 16th. I got my dates off by 2. It's actually the 18th. Click like, click subscribe. If you're enjoying this video, even if you're not, click subscribe. You don't have to click like, though. I like this more subscriptions more than anything else. Excuse me. Alice Wilkerson with us from Advanced Maryland. Great conversation. At least I'm enjoying it. I feel like I'm learning a lot. I thank you so much for your time, Alice, giving us a lot of it. I put together these questions. I think we've kind of touched on all of them, but maybe we can quickly go through them. And I'll add a few little twists maybe to, what obviously it's my program, so my show, so I get to sort of twist things around a little bit. So we talked on this 90-day legislative session long enough. It seems like it isn't, but my response there would be if there was a real dedication to progressive bills like some kind of Healthy Maryland, where you have single payer for residents of the state, that we could get real progressive legislation through. It doesn't take all year to do it, but there are, every legislator has their own bill. They want to introduce it. They want to get it discussed. So talk about the yin and the yang there of a 3-month versus full year with several sessions.
Yeah, we get a lot done in 90 days. A lot. They work really hard. Those are very long days. If we made it all year round, I don't think that we would actually get more done. It would just be slower and more drawn out. So I kind of go back and forth on this. 90 days also allows for us to get a wider variety of people with different types of experiences. If we made it a full year, then we're going to end up with a more career politician, and people are going to have to be choosing, I'm going to be a politician as my career. And I think that narrows the types of elected officials that we would have. I think it becomes less diverse. especially in terms of like what their background is. So I'm going to still stick with the 90 days. I do think it's enough. Also, that's not the only time that they're in Annapolis, and especially now, Zoom, things like that. They have briefings, they do committee work throughout the year. There's still a lot happening, and they're meeting with constituents and groups all the time, all year round.
Right. And you can build support, hopefully, for some legislation during the off months, right? So you try to get your coalition together and say, we're going to move this through. So you actually may have a little more time to plan and organize. I'm kind of with you on this. I see both sides of it. I've talked to activists who are absolutely adamant we need a full year session. I understand the arguments, but I'm not fully persuaded by them. So I'm with you there for whatever that's worth. So number two, we did talk about corporate influence, corporate cash. I guess, there's sort of the yes or no part of it. Do we have to take something? Do we have to do more? And I know you said there's a lot been done and Maryland is better than most other states. And that's my experience too. If we talk to people from Maryland, Massachusetts or New York, which are Democratic, now Democratic trifecta, although of course Massachusetts had a Republican governor for years, like Maryland. They're swamps. I mean, they really are sewers. This is not as bad, not nearly as bad, but still, as you acknowledged, the rich and powerful, maybe it's always going to be that way, are going to have an outsized role, outsized influence. Is it still too much for us to have a Maryland that works for poor, struggling, and working people?
I don't think it is an impossible hurdle. Is it a hurdle? Yes. Do we have to plan for it and work around it? Absolutely. Like, I had a bill at the very end of session this year that would have put more regulations on our utilities. And it was myself and like 2 or 3 other advocates sitting in a room with 24 contract lobbyists for BG&E. 24 lobbyists all standing around, ready to mob the legislators against a handful of advocates. But, we're going to come back next year. We're still going to win that bill. We're going to get it done. So, it is possible. We can do it. And it is a factor, but it isn't impossible to win.
Well, I love the optimism. I'm more of a pessimist on this one, I'm sorry to say. How about number C, letter C? Can the parties work together? I feel that you're a little less cynical ultimately about the Democratic Party than I'm not saying one of us is right or the other. Do you see, and that would actually be more D than C, but for C, are there areas where it would seem that even Republicans can cross the line and support real progressive priorities?
So first, I will complain about Democrats all day long. I have plenty of criticisms. Don't get me wrong. There's so much more that we can and that the party and our legislators should be doing. Just don't even have enough time for it. Yes. Are there Republicans who will support things that I consider to be progressive? Absolutely. Do they consider to be progressive? No. That's part of the reason why I don't always charge out and say, here's my progressive bill. Here's a progressive policy. We have to talk, how we talk about things is important. If I go around saying youth justice reform is only a progressive policy issue, I'm going to turn folks off. Turns out I have a bunch of Republicans who I disagree with on a lot of issues, who support youth justice reform, who support ending the automatic charging of kids as adults because they get it. They understand that it's a public safety argument. That's why states like Kentucky and Arkansas are way more progressive than we are in Maryland on these issues. Also, I'll point out there are tons of votes that happen. Most votes, I think, that happen in the legislature are bipartisan votes. And some of the legislators that I've worked with that I've really enjoyed and had some just great experiences with have been members of the Republican Party. We should always be seeking to find common ground and also always trying to have conversations. A lot of times people come in with a position and it's not coming from a place that's really like information based. They don't have the knowledge. They haven't really had a conversation about this with someone who has a different perspective. And so we should at least be trying to have those conversations. I'm always going and meeting with Republicans, even on things that I know they're not going to agree with, but just to say, I want to make sure you understand this. When we go into this hearing on this complicated topic, I know I don't have your vote, but I want to make sure that you understand what we're talking about and I can address any of your questions so that we can have a smoother hearing. It's less inflammatory if we still try to reach out and like build those relationships. And then when we can find something where we can agree, it also opens the door for them to come to me on things and say, hey, I want your opinion.
So 100%. I'm just going to jump in because I'm sorry to do that, but we only have a few more minutes. We're going to try to cut off at exactly noon. So 100% with you on that, Alice. And I also think it's really important. You didn't mention this. I'm sure you do, though, to not just talk to Republican legislators, but Republican voters and present to them why specific policies that you support or legislation will likely make their lives better, why you believe it would be in their best interest, not in someone else, but in their best interest also to support this bill. So I think those are really important. I'm so happy to hear you say that. That's one of my biggest beefs. I have many beefs like you do with the Democrats, but my biggest is so much partisanship. I mean, and I'm going to just call out, you said you should call people out. I'm going to call out your former boss. A lot of progressives really like Jamie. My biggest, and I have a lot of criticisms of him, but my biggest one is that when I've tried to bring up to him in those occasions where I've had an opportunity to talk to him about areas where I think the Democrats are falling short, Democratic leadership is not leading, he will invariably turn it against the Republicans. He will invariably say, well, we can't do that because of the Republicans, the Republicans. And even when he led the impeachment hearing against Trump, after Trump was out of office, to me, that was partisan posturing. It was not about bringing together poor, struggling, and working people. It was, in fact, dividing them. And to me, that is not getting us where we need to go. In fact, it's just the opposite. So that's my take. I don't know if you want to respond, but you certainly can if you like, because that's someone you know.
It's much more difficult at the congressional level. And I will say, working with Jamie when he was in the state Senate, he was really known for being a consensus builder and being able to work with Republicans and moderates, on really tough issues. So I know that it is something that he has always worked on when the opportunity has existed. I can't speak to what it's like to be in Congress today. I know I wouldn't want to be there, though.
Well, I think that's very fair because I am referring only to his career in the federal government. And I would certainly agree he works well with moderates in the Democratic Party. Sometimes I wish he would work less well with them and work more aggressively with the progressives. That, again, is my take. Okay, let's get to the final question. Can our democratic institutions save us? You do sound optimistic, at least with respect to Maryland. And what I mean by that is, are we going to need to have civil disobedience? Do we need people in the streets? Do we need to see rioting or fires like we are seeing in Paris or we have seen recently in Paris to have meaningful reductions, ultimately move away completely from fossil fuels before our planet is a completely dirty gray cinder? What do workers need to do so that they really are fairly compensated for their hard work and the billionaire class doesn't enrich itself and engorge itself like leeches and bloodsuckers on everyone else? Can that be done through the democratic institutions that the founders, created and we've tried to improve?
Yes, I think so, but we have to get back to them. Like, I think we lost them. Like, unions, right? Look at the participation in unions. It has dropped off significantly. So how do we build back to that? Let's unionize. I'm not going to say that we should be rioting in the streets, but civil rights movement, we needed MLK and Malcolm X. Like, it takes both types of voices to get things done. And so, I do think that we need to go back to what worked in the past, and we need to invest in those types of organizing principles and really look at how we can use and maximize our institutional capacities. Like, I do think it's possible, but I think we lost it for a while, and it's going to take time to build it back up.
All right, I want to thank you so much. What a delight speaking with Alice Wilkerson from Advance Maryland, and I really enjoyed the conversation. I learned a lot. I'm sure that our viewers did, and I hope to get you back on, Alice, soon. We'll be back tomorrow. I'll be back tomorrow, Friday. Have a great day.